Welcome back to another piece of Top Choice Movies recap. The movie today was released in 2017. The piece is titled Infidelity in Suburbia. Please subscribe before we begin, and don't forget to like, comment, and share. Be cautious of potential spoilers. The film begins with a passionate couple sharing an intimate moment, only to have their rendezvous interrupted by the woman's son appearing with a lifeless mouse. The scene then shifts to a boatyard where a family of 3 is preparing their boat. Laura, the wife, talks about renovating the kitchen, but her husband Greg is not interested. As they converse, she instructs her son Jamie to be careful with a knife. While her husband steps away to take a call, another man discreetly observes Laura. She almost topples over while loading items into her cart, but the man comes to her aid. After he leaves, Laura's husband returns with a newspaper featuring a headline about an arson in Denton Island. As they talk, Jamie falls off the deck into the water, and the man who helped Laura rushes to rescue him, introducing himself as Elliot. The grateful parents invite him for a family dinner, during which Laura confides in her best friend Myra about her growing fascination with Elliot's physique. After Myra leaves, they invite Elliot inside, where he admires a painting that Laura made. She explains that Greg transformed her studio into a workshop, while Greg flirts with his assistant Hannah over the phone. Eventually, they all sit down, and Elliot offers to renovate their home at family-friendly rates, which they happily accept. The next day, Laura goes jogging with Myra and they discuss Elliot's attractiveness, with Myra envying Laura's good fortune. Upon her return home, Laura catches a glimpse of Elliot in the yard without a shirt. She descends to meet him, and as he explains the renovation, Laura finds it difficult to tear her gaze away from his impeccably toned body. Laura runs upstairs to shower and prepares herself. As she enters the shower cabin, Elliot silently passes in front of the room. Later that day, Laura goes to the supermarket to try some shades for the kitchen, and Elliot springs up behind her. He compliments her choice of design and then offers her a surprise. He makes her close her eyes and offers her a sip of juice and a bite of the delicious canola. He mentions that it's from a bakery called Laodicea, and that he used to go there with his mom whenever they were in town. Afterward, they leave the store and head back to Laura's house. Myra comes in and witnesses Elliot working once again shirtless. She's stunned by his perfection and asks him questions about his living and girlfriends. He states that he has no girlfriend, but has his eyes on someone. With that, he leaves, and Myra is left feeling intimidated. Later, Laura accompanies Elliot to the boatyard, where she goes to Greg's boat to check if anyone tried to break in. After entering the boat, she lifts the cushions to find a purple panties of a girl underneath it. Reality dawns on her, and she sheds tears of frustration and sorrow. Elliot approaches Laura and inquires about her distress. She confides in him about the panties she discovered on the boat, suspecting they belong to Hannah. To confirm her suspicions, she visits Hannah's profile on a dating site. Upon verifying her doubts, she exclaims in frustration. To console her, Elliot takes her to his boat and offers her a cup of coffee. He provides comfort and advises her to move forward and embrace the path that lies ahead. After their heartfelt conversation, he escorts her outside and gently covers her with a blanket. They exchange smiles before parting ways. Meanwhile, Elliot sheds tears on his boat while gazing at pictures of his mother. The scene then shifts to Laura's perspective, as she questions Greg about his whereabouts the previous night. He claims to have been at work and had called Hannah to take notes. Laura's suspicions are further reinforced, and when Greg tries to approach her, she pushes him away. Elliot arrives at the house the following morning and unpacks all his renovation equipment. Laura returns from her jog and finds Jamie engaged in conversation with Elliot. It becomes apparent that he is great with kids, and Laura admires this quality. In the meantime, she sends Jamie downstairs to be with Myra and Charlie while she heads to the shower. As she enters the cabin, Elliot follows her into the bathroom. After undressing himself, he joins her in the shower cabin. With ragged breaths, Laura allows Elliot to take control, and they passionately continue with their makeout session. Afterward, Laura is seen at the boatyard observing various couples hugging each other. She walks over to their boat to talk to her husband Greg, who warmly welcomes her. Greg talks about the behavior of teenagers these days and how they sneak into different boats. Laura listens in astonishment as he mentions the purple underwear, and Greg reveals that it must be some of the teenagers who also left the flap open. Disturbed and ashamed, Laura stares in shock as Greg hugs her and confesses his love. Meanwhile, Elliot is playing with Jamie in the yard. Laura arrives with Myra and gets out of the car. She watches as Elliot talks to Jamie and offers him candy. In the meantime, Laura returns and sends Jamie to play with Laura's son while taking Elliot to the back shed to explain that they must call this off. Elliot ignores her and begins to seduce her. She resists for a while, trying to defend her feelings for Greg, but eventually gives in to Elliot and proceeds with the romance. As night falls, Elliot sits in his boat, cutting Greg's face from Laura's pictures. He replaces Greg's face with his own and continues his disturbing work. The next morning, he arrives at the house and offers Laura yellow roses for her birthday, claiming he knows everything about her. Laura is puzzled as Elliot watches her creepily. Just then, Greg comes out as he's leaving for work and is surprised to see the yellow roses, knowing they are Laura's favorite. Despite their anger, both men leave for work. Laura storms inside and scolds Elliot for his actions. She acknowledged her mistake in misjudging Greg and declared that she could no longer tolerate Elliot's behavior. She demanded that he leave the house, making it clear that she did not want him working there anymore. As Laura completely rejected him, Elliot began to tremble with sorrow. The scene faded out, and the next thing we saw was Laura returning home with Jamie, claiming that Elliot was no longer around. However, it turned out that he was still lurking in the yard, watching Laura. Later, Laura got ready in her bathroom, dressed up, and stepped outside, only to be surprised by a group of friends for a birthday party, including Greg, Myra's husband Bill, and others. She expressed her gratitude to everyone and proceeded to kiss Greg, while Elliot looked on with sadness. Meanwhile, Hannah arrived and informed Laura about how excited Greg was to organize the party, even making her work late for it. Upon learning this revelation, Laura simply smiled. Greg then took Elliot and introduced him to Hannah, who began to eye him seductively. Meanwhile, Elliot maintains a constant gaze at Laura, while Greg remains close to her, making Elliot feel uncomfortable. In an attempt to distance himself from the situation, Elliot excuses himself and suggests that the ladies follow him. Hannah sits with him and tries to engage in conversation, but he responds minimally, his eyes still fixed on Laura. After the party concludes, Hannah rushes up to Elliot and asks him to take her along. On the other hand, Laura lies in bed with Greg and attempts to confess what she did with Elliot, but Greg interrupts her and expresses admiration for her. They begin complimenting each other and end up becoming intimate. Meanwhile, Elliot takes Hannah to the boat, where she aggressively pursues him despite his lack of interest. They both become rough and eventually end up in bed. However, Hannah discovers that he is not aroused, leaving her frustrated. She gets up, intending to leave, but notices pictures of Laura on the wall. Astonished, she calls Elliot a nutter, which infuriates him, leading him to strangle Hannah from behind. The following morning, Laura is watering the yard when Greg approaches her and expresses his adoration. He also mentions that once the sailing trip is over, they will have time for themselves. As they share kisses, Elliot watches them from the house, consumed by jealousy. After Greg departs, Laura enters the shed and discovers that it has been transformed into an art studio, complete with canvases. To her dismay, she discovers Laura and Elliot's true love written everywhere, causing her great horror. As she looks around in fright, she hears Jaime's screams and rushes inside. To her shock, she finds Jamie collapsed on the floor. As she checks on him, Jamie reveals that Elliot was there to find him. Without hesitation, Laura immediately runs outside and confronts Elliot, demanding that he leave them and stop surprising her. However, Elliot's behavior becomes increasingly obsessive, as he insists that she and Greg are finished. His obsession soon turns into forceful behavior and threats, as he forcefully holds Laura. In a desperate attempt to escape, Laura screams, catching Jamie's attention. He intervenes and Elliot releases his grip on Laura before leaving the house. Later that night, Laura decides to search the web for information about Elliot's work. Among the reviews, she comes across a disturbing comment from someone named Purple Wallflower, who claims that Elliot destroyed her life. The next morning, without wasting any time, Laura sets off for Denton Island and heads to a shop. Upon entering, she speaks to the owner and inquires about Purple Wallflower. The shop owner informs her about a woman named Willie Hamill. Armed with the address, Laura walks to Willie's house and engages in a conversation with her. After some initial hesitation, Willie opens up and reveals that she lost everything because of Elliot, her marriage, her family, and more. She also describes him as being mentally unstable. Laura is urged to investigate what happened to his mother, causing her to quickly close the door in fear. The camera then shifts to the docks, where a girl accidentally drops her necklace into the water while running her hand through it. To her horror, a dead girl's head emerges from the water, leading to screams of terror from onlookers. The news of Hannah's death flashes across the TV screen, catching Anna's attention. Myra and Bill try to reach Greg, but before he can answer, Elliot suddenly appears behind him. The scene fades out as the commotion startles Laura awake from her slumber. Filled with fear and anxiety, she grabs a baseball bat and heads downstairs, following the sounds of something breaking into the house. In the living room, she finds the cannon on a plate with a shattered window frame nearby. Meanwhile, Elliot is seen leaving the house slowly, overwhelmed with anguish. On the other hand, Greg wakes up on a boat tied to a pole. He manages to free himself and tries to escape, but Elliot stops him and strikes him. Despite Greg's resistance, he ultimately succumbs. In the interim, Laura confides in Myra and shares her suspicions regarding Greg's disappearance. She also discloses that she had a romantic involvement with Elliot, which occurred on 2 occasions. Myra reacts with astonishment, as Laura further describes Elliot's unsettling obsession and threats. Urgently, Myra advises her to be cautious. Later, Laura visits the bakery and engages in a conversation with the elderly woman at the counter. After ordering tea and a cupcake, Laura notices a wall of memories adorned with picture frames. The elderly woman proceeds to recount details about Elliot and his visits with his mother since childhood. Unfortunately, his mother didn't have faithful partners, resulting in Elliot lacking stability in his life. However, matters took a dark turn when he set fire to their entire house. Laura listens to the story in sheer horror and abruptly gets up. As she's leaving, the elderly woman reveals that Elliot had visited earlier that morning, claiming that he intended to marry a widowed wife and become a stepfather. Upon hearing this chilling revelation, Laura rushes home, where she is struck with terror as she encounters Elliot instead of Greg. Laura is bewildered as she inquires about Greg, but Elliot begins terrorizing her in a deranged manner and subjects her to brutal treatment. Jamie comes in midway, but Elliot sends him back and later drags Laura upstairs to the bedroom. He ties her up, but Laura uses her senses and develops a tactic to get free. She declares her love for Elliot and admits that she has finally realized the depth of her feelings for him. In response, Elliot unties her and they both proceed downstairs to have dinner. Meanwhile, Jamie remains tied to the chair, but despite Elliot's unstable behavior, Laura asks Jamie to eat and play along. Suddenly, Myra and Bill arrive outside, causing Laura to attempt to walk towards the window. However, Elliot discovers her intentions and forcefully instructs both mother and son to immediately run upstairs to the bedroom. In a surprising turn of events, Elliot picks up Jamie and allows him to go outside, granting Laura some private time. Taking advantage of the situation, Elliot begins to approach Laura intimately and attempts to rape her. However, just as he pushes her onto the bed and positions himself on top of her, Jamie bursts through the door. This triggers a flashback for Elliot, reminding him of a traumatic childhood experience where his mother was lying in bed. This momentary distraction allows Laura to strike Elliot and escape. She pushes him aside and rushes downstairs, urging Jamie to flee for his life. Unfortunately, Elliot quickly returns and engages in a struggle with Laura. He throws her across the floor and violently strikes her head with a hammer, causing her to lose consciousness. At nightfall, Elliot carries Laura's lifeless body to a hidden boat, concealed within a sack. However, Laura manages to slice through the bag and confronts Elliot on the boat. With a swift movement, she stabs him in the stomach and escapes, leaving behind a trail of blood on the deck. Following the crimson path, she enters another boat only to find Greg lying unconscious on the floor. Filled with urgency, she calls for Coast Guard assistance, but unfortunately, the lines are disconnected. Meanwhile, Elliot regains consciousness on the boat, and Laura strikes him once again before making her escape. As Elliot relentlessly pursues her, the chase leads them to an upstairs room. In a desperate attempt, Elliot tries to strangle Laura, but she fights back with all her strength. Eventually, she manages to hurl him out of the window, causing him to plummet, hit his head, and meet his demise. In the closing scenes of the film, we witness Laura's family enjoying a blissful life. To their surprise, Laura discovers a delectable cannoli in the fridge, which turns out to be a thoughtful gesture from Greg. With joy in their hearts, they savor the cannoli, bringing the film to a heartwarming conclusion. Please feel free to discuss the film in the comments section. Thanks for watching.